It's becoming increasingly apparent to me how identity politics and all its associate ideologies, critical race theory, the queer theory, so-called, the radical feminism that goes along with this, the 1619 Project, all of this is really inconsistent with and radically opposed to the notion of a nation. Think about it. Any nation is based upon citizens that have something in common. A nation is not the same thing as a crowd. A group of people come together, it's just a crowd. They have nothing in common. They just happen to be in a particular place. And even then, they're usually there for a particular reason. We're here to see a play, or we're here to celebrate something. So we have that in common. Now, a nation is a bigger idea. It's an idea of people who are kind of in it together, who share benefits that come from being part of that nation, but they also take on the burdens of being part of that nation. They're willing to fight, if necessary, to protect the country and to protect each other. And this is strewn throughout not just American history, but the documents of American history. The concept, for example, of the common good. Whose good? The good that American citizens have in common. The notion of a common defense. I'm going to fight for you as long as I know that you're going to be willing to fight for me. The idea of the general welfare. That phrase comes right out of the U.S. Constitution. It implies that there is a general welfare that applies to everybody. So, now for many years, the multiculturalists, so-called, would say things like, well, you know, we're a country defined by diversity. What we have in common is our diversity. Now, first of all, that's a senseless statement. What we have in common is our diversity is another way of saying we have nothing in common. And you have to ask, is it even possible to have a nation on that basis? But we're a long way from that even. We're so much worse than that. Why? Because we now have a concrete strategy of division, of not just bifurcation, but trifurcation, essentially multiple wedges of division. And these wedges are not accidental. It's not as if someone's pursuing a common good, but Luther's pursuing the view, this is what's right about Christianity, and the Catholics say, no, this is what's right. And so division comes accidentally. Neither is trying to cause it, but it's caused because they radically disagree. No. With identity politics, we have a plan to have division. It's built on the Marxist plan, which was to create division among classes, but this is a multifarious division strategy to divide America based on race, based on class, based on gender, based on sexual orientation, based on multiple other categories. So division is, in fact, an inherent part of the strategy. And I'm very much reminded of that by a couple of recent episodes in the news. Let me talk first briefly about the Dave Chappelle controversy. And I don't want to rehearse the controversy. I really want more to point to a facet of it that hasn't really been noticed. Because some conservatives are championing Chappelle. Oh, he's fighting against censorship, and oh, he won't be canceled. And there is an element to all that. But let's remember that if you listen carefully to Chappelle, what he's really saying is that I, Chappelle, am a kind of black rights guy. I want blacks to be at the top of the totem pole. The black issue is paramount for me. And what I'm annoyed by, Chappelle is saying, is that the black issue appears to be trumped, overshadowed, transcended by the kind of gay and trans issue. And that's what he's annoyed about. He's annoyed that he's not occupying the top spot on the victim poll, that somebody else has sort of usurped his place. And that's why, for example, he gives the example of the rapper, DaBaby, I think the guy's name is. He said, you know, this guy killed a black guy. He wasn't canceled for that. But then he runs afoul of the gays and the trans people, and he gets canceled. What does that tell you? To quote Dave Chappelle, this is the disparity that I want to discuss. So for Dave Chappelle, he actually wants to transpose those two things. He wants the black issue, as I say, to be paramount. Now, but think about the wedge strategy being employed here. What we're seeing here is not just identity politics driving a wedge against a kind of fabled white male heterosexual oppressor. What we see here is a division within identity politics. That's the part about the Chappelle controversy that's missed. Chappelle is on one track, and he's objecting to the success of the other track. Now, let's turn to Katie Couric, who, as it turns out, interviewed Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was sort of this supposed, icon of liberal equality, a champion of equality for women and so on. And in fact, Katie Couric says, I'm a big RBG fan. Now, on the interview, the subject of Colin Kaepernick came up, and Ginsburg said this. Taking a knee, she said, quote, shows contempt for a government that has made it possible for their parents and grandparents to live a decent life. She goes on to say that for many of these persons of color who have come from countries, I mean, she's thinking here probably of people like Ilhan Omar, which they probably could not have lived in the places they came from. And so what she's getting at is they're enjoying freedoms here. And so I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg was saying it is outright ungrateful to be dissing, if you will, a country that has given you these blessings unavailable to other people. So what does Katie Couric do? She censors it. She essentially edits those very timely and interesting remarks. Why? She says she's doing it to, quote, protect Ginsburg. But protect Ginsburg from whom? Well, to protect Ginsburg from the woke mob. Because after all, Katie Couric realizes, I mean, she's not exactly the brightest, but she's sly and cunning in a way, and so she realizes instinctively that, hey, if I have Ruth Bader Ginsburg kind of, you know, criticizing the Black Lives Matter movement and Kaepernick, they're going to write her right out of. They're going to treat her as if she's the bad guy. They're going to write off her cause. No, she's no longer a champion of a man. So Katie Couric wants to protect Ginsburg's reputation, and she does so basically by concealing Ginsburg's true opinion. So what we see here is that these groups are now like set against each other. They're fighting. The radical feminists, aka J.K. Rowling, is now fighting with the trans people. This Chappelle brought this up. In fact, he goes, I'm a TERF. TERF is, by the way, the insulting term being applied to radical feminists by the trans activists. So what you see here is these guys started out as a common coalition. They're going to go after this sort of right-wing oppressor. They're going to go after, you know, the haters out there. And now it turns out they can't stand each other. They're trying to wipe out each other. I mean, think of all the people in Hollywood. You're canceled for this. You're canceled for that. And so there's just no limit to it. And what I'm getting at is not only that all of us, everyone's on eggshells, not just the conservatives anymore, but more importantly, this just fractures the concept of a common people with a common identity. We are no longer friends. We're basically all enemies. And even in the left, you've got all these people who are jostling with each other, and it's very easy to become an enemy, even unacceptable within the woke camp. So is there a way out of this? I can't see one other than to repudiate wokeness itself and essentially restore at least some concept of the idea. See, as Americans, we're not united by blood. We're not united by the fact that we're all born in the same country. We're not united by skin color. We need to be united by at least some attachment to common ideals and common purposes.